Comes out of tailpipes and just know that's not good for nature. I, for one, have never driven over a pothole and connected the dots between our deteriorating infrastructure and the stress we put on it through climate change. Anusha Roy talked with a CU Boulder researcher about that.
When we talk about roads, cars, and climate change, a lot of times we're talking about emissions.
So our roads, we're seeing the difference right now.
But engineering professor Paul Chanowski with CU Boulder is studying infrastructure.
A huge impact on our transportation infrastructure, our roads and bridges, because they are actually built to a very small tolerance of heat and cold and rain.
That wears on steel and roads built in conditions from decades ago. Professor Chanowski said it can be a factor in shaving 2 years off a road's lifespan.
But multiply that out, and we're talking about a serious issue.
We asked the city of Denver if it's seeing this problem. Couldn't draw a direct correlation, but said climate change is being factored into their long-term infrastructure plans. Golden officials said while they've watched this play out in other areas, they don't have specific examples for their city. They are working on climate-focused infrastructure, including charging stations for electric vehicles as an example.
Resilience is a big part of what we do.
CDOT's chief engineer said a direct connection doesn't even matter to him, whether it's climate, more people driving, or more cars on the road.
We need to harden that infrastructure
For big weather events, which is why CDOT models out resiliency projects.
Chatfield Reservoir and Bear Creek Reservoir were both built as resiliency efforts after the 1965 flood. The Pueblo Reservoir was built, same thing, to protect Pueblo from the Arkansas River.
And more is being studied.
The first phase of it, we did a I-70 border to border. Where's the weak underbelly of I-70? Glenwood Canyon is the poster child for that.
At the end of the day, CDOT said resiliency is just one component. They also have to look at the fiscal realities of what they can get to. I talked with Summit County as well, who said that a chunk of their funding is coming from the feds. They're trying to get more money to keep up with their road and their bridge problems. The issue over there is aging infrastructure, just trying to get it up to date because it's so old and they know they're going to be dealing with problems.
Beyond roads and bridges, what does this mean?
I mean, it's water systems, it's electric grids with all the people who are turning on their AC because of heat waves, or the houses who don't have the ability to cool down or warm up so that families can just live in a healthy temperature. All of that is included under infrastructure.
You build a world that works for a certain system, and then you tweak it, and it's going to have impacts everywhere.
Exactly.
All right, Anusha, thank you.
Families are starting to move into what is being called America's first solar-powered town. Babcock Ranch is about half an hour northeast of Fort Myers, Florida. Developers are building nearly 20,000 homes for a projected 50,000 people. When the project is finished, the town is supposed to produce more energy than it consumes. Manuel Bajarcas is on a construction lift with a unique view of the massive solar field powering the community. Manuel, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Up high is really the best way to give you a sense of scale here. Just take a look at this. More than 300,000 solar panels over 440 acres. That's enough to power the town and even some surrounding areas. It's operated by Florida Power and Light on land donated by the developer of Babcock Ranch, who believes it will serve as a model for sustainability.
So you're going to give us a spin?
Let's go and give it a try.
All right.
In Sid Kitson's City of the Future, people leave their car in the garage and take rides in self-driving shuttle buses.
How far away are we from being able to do that?
I think it's a lot sooner than I think people actually understand. It's much sooner.
This autonomous vehicle, hailed with an app, is zero emissions. It's powered by electricity generated from the sun, just like the street lamps, the buildings, and the lights we used for this interview.
We want to be the most sustainable new town in the United States.
Kitson, a developer, wouldn't want it any other way. Babcock Ranch has been his passion project since 2005.
We had the advantage of a green field, a blank sheet of paper. And when you have a blank sheet of paper like this, you really can do it right from the beginning.
Is it more expensive to build this way? Is it more expensive for the consumers?
You know, it's not. It's not more expensive. The people here pay the exact same amount that everybody else pays in the Florida Power and Light network.
A hurricane coming through and ripping apart those panels, what would happen then?
When Hurricane Irma hit Florida, the eye of the storm came right over the top of Babcock Ranch. Not one panel out of 343,000 panels were dislodged.
All right, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I am Sandy Shellis, and this is my wonderful partner, Jennifer Hines, and we have, again, one of those pretty newsy shows, a little different tonight, maybe, mainstream media centric, United States, a little politics. So what's going on, Jen?
Well, we do. We have a great show tonight. I'm so excited to be here. And thank you, Sandy, for that great intro. So, high level, guys, we're going to be talking about infrastructure, particularly in the U.S. This is a U.S. centric show and a political show tonight as well. So, the first one is from Grist. Hurricane Ian was powerful storm. Real estate developers made it a catastrophe. So, how the real estate developers chose not to listen to sea level rise projections and other things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
who
those
cares?
great
It doesn't
guys.
really matter anyway. It's not
Big
real.
money.
And then next up is from The Guardian. This is pretty interesting. Amtrak suspends San Diego Los Angeles service due to shifting ground. So Amtrak is off indefinitely. They don't have a moment when they're going to be, there's no ETA for opening the San Diego Los Angeles service. So too bad if you ever wanted to do Amtrak and travel between those two cities. And then we've got one from NPR. Come along as we connect the dots between climate, migration, and the far right. Pretty interesting article about mindset. Then we've got one from the New York Times. Florida leaders rejected major climate laws. Now they're seeking storm aid. So I don't know. There's like a little, there's some sort of morality tale in that, isn't there, Sandy?
Well, I would say so. I would say more like a hypocritical tale.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to call it.
And then bunch of bullshit tale. All right. Anyway, it's early yet, and I'm already wild up.
Just wait, just wait. And then we've got one from The Guardian, Hurricane Ian, America's urge to weigh risks of rebuilding in vulnerable areas. Don't say we didn't tell ya. So they're going to probably rebuild right where they had their houses. Yeah. And then we've got one from Climate Wire. Ian will financially ruin homeowners and insurers. And then we're going to finish up with that solar community. This 100% solar community endured Hurricane Ian with no loss of power and minimal damage. And we just saw a little short in the beginning about that. A little
hopium tonight, guys. a little bit of hopium tonight. A little more of an upbeat kind of thing than we usually do, but we shall find out if I'm really lying or not.
Yes, that's right.
All right, so I suppose.
So, you know what we didn't talk about, Sandy? And I'm just going to take your direction. Who's going to do what?
Oh, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Okay.
I would say, sometimes we are very busy. I would say, why don't, let's see, me, you, or you start.
Okay.
How's that? You
That
start,
sounds
darling,
great.
because then you start, you end, and it works out beautifully. And see, guys, we're not perfect. We don't have everything perfect. We have it quite friggin' close.
There you go.
You have to admit, it's quite close. So here we are. We've got the first one, Jen, and I say you go for it. Go for it, girlfriend.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Let's jump on in. The water's just fine. Hurricane Ian was a powerful storm. Real estate developers made it a catastrophe. Why? Dredge and fill created thousands of homes vulnerable to storm surge.
Dredge and fill.
That and a rising sea level sounds like a disaster. So, guys, a century ago, the coast of Southwest Florida was a maze of swamps and shoals, prone to frequent flooding and almost impossible to navigate by boat. These days, the region is home to more than 2 million people, and over the past decade, it has ranked as one of the fastest growing parts of the country. Many of these new homes sit mere feet from the ocean, surrounded by canals that flow to the Gulf of Mexico. When current Hurricane Ian struck the region on Wednesday, its 150-mile-an-hour winds and extreme storm surge smashed hundreds of buildings to bits, flooded houses, and tossed around boats and mobile homes. Cities including Fort Myers and Port Charlotte were destroyed in a matter of hours. These vulnerable cities only exist thanks to the audacious maneuvers of real estate developers who manipulated coastal and riverine ecosystems to create valuable land over the course of the 20th century. These attempts to tame the forces of nature by tearing out mangroves, bad idea, and draining swamps, also bad idea, had disastrous environmental consequences, but they also allowed for the construction of tens of thousands of homes right in the water's path. What this is basically showing us is that developers, if there's money to be made, they will develop it, said Steven Strader. Greed is the... an associate professor at Villanova University who studies the societal forces behind disasters. Quote, "You have a natural wetland marsh. The primary function of those regions is to protect the inland areas from things like storm surge. You're building on top of it. You're replacing it with subdivisions and homes. What do we expect to see?" And here's a lovely picture of some poor guy walking down his street, which is full of water. The root of Southwest Florida's vulnerability is a development technique called dredge and fill. developers dug up land from the bottom of rivers and swamps, then piled it up until it rose out of the water, creating solid artificial land where there had once been only damp mud. This kind of dredging began well before Florida's post-war real estate boom, when the state's agriculture and phosphorus mining industries wanted to control inland flooding, create navigable pathways for boats, and cut paths for rainwater to flow into the Gulf of Mexico. As a result of these efforts, the flow of water to the coast from Florida's soggy inland became tame and predictable, and the channels gave boats direct access to the Gulf of Mexico. Developers began to see the southwest coast as a perfect place for retirees and soldiers returning from World War II to settle down. They just had to build houses for them first. They carved existing swamps into a dense network of so-called finger canals, then used the extra dirt to elevate the remaining land, letting water in. Dredge and fill became the established method to meet growing post-war demand for waterfront housing, wrote 3 historians in a 2002 historical study of Southwest Florida's waterways. The most infamous developer to use this method was Gulf American, a firm founded in the 1950s by 2 scamming brothers named Leonard and Jack Rosen, who also sold televisions and cures for baldness. Wow. Gulf American bought a massive plot of land across the river from Fort Myers, cut hundreds of canals in it, and sold pieces of it by mail order to retirees and returning veterans up north. The result was Cape Coral, which the writer Michael Grinwood once called a boomtown that shouldn't exist. Probably now it doesn't much exist. Though the main objective was to create land for home construction, the use of dredge and fill production produced a suburban landscape of artificial canals, waterways, and basins, wrote the authors of a 2002 survey. The canals served a number of purposes, including the drainage, creation of waterfront property as an enhancement for sales. Everybody can have waterfront property now. It's great. Access for open water for boating, and a source of fill material for the creation of developable lots. The 3 Mackle brothers, who owned another prominent firm called General Development Corporation, adopted a similar technique on other sections of Florida's Gulf Coast. They developed more than a dozen communities across the state, including Port Charlotte, Port North, and Marco Island, all of which fell inside Ian's radius as it made landfall on Wednesday. In all these cases, development involved carving up coastal swampland, creating a canal network to drain out excess water, and building houses on the land that remained. It's just the same reason why golf courses have lots of water hazards. The big hole that they dig out to put the soil on the land and make fairways become lakes, said Strader. And now everybody's got a waterfront property, but it also means you get a lot more water intrusion. Back over the environmental impacts of dredge and fill eventually led to restrictions on the process in the 1970s. The public grew outraged at the idea of chemicals and human waste runoff from residential canal systems in the ocean. That didn't stop new arrivals from rushing into canal-side developments like Cape Coral, which grew by 25% between 2010 and 2019. It helped, of course, that Southwest Florida saw very few hurricanes over the second half of the 20th century. Only 3 hurricanes have made landfall in the region since 1960, during which time the sea level rise off Fort Myers has risen about 8 inches. Since 1960, it's gone up 8 inches by Fort Myers. Wow. And none of them caused catastrophic flooding. Hurricane Ian brought that reprieve to an end, bringing home the consequences of risky development in the same way Hurricane Ida brought home the consequences of coastal erosion last September. When Hurricane Ida rampaged through the Louisiana coast, it drew attention to the deterioration of that state's coastal wetlands, which had long acted as a buffer against storm surge. In Southwest Florida, something different happened. Not only did developers clear wetlands, but they also pushed right out to the water's edge, leaving just inches of space between homes and the Gulf's waters. With sea levels rising and catastrophic storms growing more common, the era of constant flooding has started again, this time with millions more people in the way. Wow. Pretty amazing. It's amazing what grieving hubris will do. Yeah, Sandy. I can't hear you, Sandy. Still can't hear you. I did hear you before.
How about
Oh,
now?
here you go.
Test,
Yes.
test, test. Okay,
Yes,
I must
yes.
have touched something. All right, guys. All right, the perfect show has just ended. Now we will go on with the perfectly imperfect, wonderful show. All right, that's because I have a big finger. On my
All right.
thing. All right, so we are now going to the left coast, as I was saying, and we are going to read about Amtrak tonight and suspending San Diego to Los Angeles because of shifting ground. And this is it's sure is infrastructure night. Here we go. Metrolink also suspends trains because ground underneath stretch of seaside track in Southern California has shifted. Pretty eerie. It has shifted. All right, here we go. Metrolink and Amtrak have suspended train service linking San Diego and Los Angeles. And I have very good friends there that probably I think have used this, along with the rest of the U.S., because ground underneath that stretch in Southern California has shifted, they say. The officials say that. The San Diego Union Tribune reported Friday that service has been suspended indefinitely in the community of San Clemente. That's pretty heavy. On the border of Orange and San Diego counties. The move comes after recent ocean surge associated with Tropical Storm K, which caused high tides and waves that shifted the coastal tracks. The tracks serve as the only viable link that connects San Diego with LA and the rest of the country. The San Diego Union Tribune reports the tracks are part of the 351-mile Los Angeles, San Diego, San Luis Obispo rail corridor, also known as the Lawson Corridor, which serves as the U.S.'s second busiest intercity passenger rail corridor. Holy crap. So last year, the community faced a similar problem and officials shut down the tracks for 2 weeks. Workers brought in additional boulders to help shore up the coastline, which has been eroding amid the ongoing global climate crisis. The Orange County Transportation Authority, which owns the tracks, planned to hold a special meeting Monday to discuss the potential solutions. There's the S word. The emergency plan will likely involve driving large ground anchors into the bottom of the slope to the track to prevent movement, OCTA spokesman Eric Carpenter told the San Diego Union Tribune. So Metrolink said service will remain suspended until we have confirmation from the experts the slope movement has stopped. Unfortunately, continued movement to the right of way in the San Clemente area is forcing Metrolink to suspend Orange County and Inland Empire Orange County line service south of the Laguna Niguel Mission Viejo station beginning Friday until further notice, Metrolink said in a statement. And they added, working with geologists, geotechnical engineers, and surveyors, we have determined to ensure passenger safety service suspension is necessary until we have confirmation from those experts that that slope movement has stopped. We will not resume it. So basically, who knows, right? In an email to the San Diego Union Tribune, Metrolink spokesperson Scott Jacobson said that the company has placed over 20,000 tons of rock and boulders along the tracks to secure the right-of-way. And where do they get it?
Oh, my God.
You know? Oh, my God. Amtrak released a similar statement saying this is a temporary track closure in San Clemente that will allow crews to repair and strengthen areas near the tracks. A team of geologists and engineers noticed a need for repairs after recent storms. They just noticed it. We plan to run modified service while repairs are made. So this may take several weeks, months, years, decades, if we have them. Amtrak also said it's working to provide train service through a partner with connecting bus service to cover the route. According to Amtrak, a train service between Oceanside and San Diego will resume next week with a bus bridge connecting Oceanside and Irvine. Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner trains have had an annual ridership of nearly 3 million passengers, while Coaster and Metrolink commuter trains see up to 5 million riders each year. And I want to make a point here about buses and trains. They service middle-class people. They service those that are poor. They service people that just can't hop on a plane in Los Angeles to get up to get that, to San Diego.
Right.
So,
and there's one other thing. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Sandy. Sorry.
Go. I'm taking a sip here.
So there's one other thing that I want to point out. And those of you who have your Southern California geology and you kind of know how it's laid out, right? So if you're in Laguna Niguel, and I know because I used to live there, if you go south of Laguna Niguel, right before you get to Oceanside, you get to San Onofre Nuclear Plant.
Lovely.
It's no longer open, but it is like when I lived there in the 80s, I would pass it quite frequently, and it's like two giant boobs with lights on top, because it's these two things with, little red lights that go blink, blink, blink. So I used to call them the boobs.
The boobs.
And I actually did have a stint where I actually worked at San Onofre Nuclear Plant back in
kidding, Jen.
Yeah, back in 1984. In 1984, I worked at San Onofre Nuclear Plant in the secretarial pool. I was still kind of working out my career. And it was, I don't know if you ever saw Joe versus the Volcano, but there's an opening scene in Joe versus the Volcano where he's having that very bad day and he goes into, work at that horrible place with the fluorescent lights. You probably don't remember that movie, but it was a classic. But anyway, point is, working at San Onofre Nuclear Plant was very much like the office scene in Joe versus the Volcano.
Oh, wow. Well, I think we're all probably going to want to watch that now. I bet anything. Yeah, it will be one of those. Jennifer, you'll just have to put it so I can put it in the show notes, actually, because it was interesting. Yeah, you guys might want to watch it. All right, how you doing out there, guys? Groot had said San Diego and Los Angeles are 120 miles apart, but, for someone who doesn't have the wherewithal to hop on a plane or even drive, that mass transit could mean working or not. So, yeah, it's pretty heavy. Right. And hello, Groot. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Groot.
By
nice
the way.
To see you, Groot.
And you know what? It's nice to see everybody. Kim, thank you for moderating. And we have Rob Warner and Jean and Poppy and John D. Gary Hoover. Hi, Earl. We will definitely think of you when we do the flush of the day, Earl. And Gozer's here with us from the UK. And Scott from Missouri, right? Missouri. Yeah, and Bob LeBlanc. Welcome, Bob. It's really nice to have you with us, Bob, by the way. I see Bob and Foggy and T-Bone and Field B. Wow. David Jimenez, Vegematic. All right, Patty P. There you go. Y'all got a shout out, Allison Frake. Yes. Now we are moving along.
We are moving along, and we are doing one from NPR. Come along as we connect the dots between climate, migration, and the far right. Pretty interesting. This just out by one Ari Shapiro. I don't know if you guys ever listened to his stuff. It's pretty good. Here we go. As a climate change expert at the World Bank, Arame Tal is deeply familiar with the facts and figures of global warming. She understands how rising seas and changing weather cycles are affecting her home community, her home country of Senegal, from a retreating coastline in the city of Dakar, where she grew up, to her mother's homeland of Diourbel, where drought and floods have forced people to abandon their peanut farms. But even with all that knowledge, Tal was still shocked when her own nephew attempted to flee the country for a better life in Europe. Quote, to the whole family's astonishment, he disappeared one night and we looked for him. He couldn't be found. Earlier this year, 18-year-old Amadou had reached the boat that was supposed to smuggle him out of Senegal and into Spain. The captain warned of heavy rain that was forecast at sea and said the trip might not be safe. Afraid for his life, Amadou disembarked. Everybody else who got on that boat never came back, Tal told me, and they were confirmed to have sunk in the Atlantic. So he escaped. But you always wonder, what if he had actually taken the boat?
Oh, no!
There is an expression in Wolof, one of Senegal's main languages, Javabu bo sobaku. It literally means the weather is changing. Today, we are launching a project to look at how the ripples of climate change are radiating outwards. Beginning in Senegal, my team and I are setting out to connect the dots on three major stories that I have often covered as distinct issues over the years. How climate change, migration, and xenophobic politics are linked. My most ambitious reporting trip as host of All Things Considered have tended to return for a few consistent themes. Number one, I've watched the rising seas swallow islands in the submarine islands of India and tracked the efforts to slow climate change in the UN summits in Glasgow, Scotland, and Paris, France. Number two, I followed in the footsteps of migrants walking hundreds of miles from Venezuela to Colombia and from Syria to Germany. Number three, I've tried to understand the rise of political extremism in places as diverse as Indonesia and the United States. Lately, I've started wondering about the ways in which these three broad themes weave together. What is the connection between climate change, the movement of people around the globe, and the rise of xenophobic politicians? That's the overarching question we're hoping to answer with this reporting trip. The links among these three global trend lines are not hard to find. Many right-wing political leaders make attacks on migrants an overt part of their pitch. Donald Trump launched his presidential campaign with the racist claims that Mexico was sending rapists to the United States. And one of the most frequent applause lines as president was that he would build a wall along the U.S. southern border. In Sweden, Members of an anti-immigrant political party that I reported on when they were outsiders in 2015 now have a shot at controlling the government. And in Italy, voters just chose a prime minister who has called for a naval blockade of Africans. We also know that climate change is speeding up the movement of people around the world. Exactly how fast is difficult to specify. Quote, when we say climate migrant, we don't really know what we're saying. Jay Balaga of the Rand Corporation told me there's such a wide range of definitions. If you define climate migrants only as people whose homes are swallowed by rising seas, the number might be a few million by the middle of the century. On the other hand, UN experts have argued that climate change exacerbated the conditions that led to the civil war in Syria. So, under more sweeping definitions, the number of climate migrants around the world could quickly climb much higher. And of course, we don't know how aggressively the world will move to limit carbon emissions and avert the worst possible impacts of climate change. To complicate matters further, there is rarely only one reason someone decides to leave their home country for a more promising life elsewhere. Quote, so is it 1 + 1 = 2? Not necessarily, Tal says. But in our lived experience in African countries, we've seen a dramatic shift in the number of climate-related disasters that have been hitting us across the continent. As Kaylee Ober of Refugees International told me, climate change can be a vulnerability multiplier, exacerbating other factors such as corruption and poverty that were already making life difficult to sustain. But where human rights advocates see climate change as a vulnerability multiplier, opponents of migration see it as a threat multiplier. Some far-right extremists have used the worst-case scenario forecasts of climate migration as an excuse to attack immigrants. In El Paso, Texas, a mass shooter in 2019 killed more than 20 people and wounded more than 20 others. He told authorities he was targeting Mexicans, and he left behind a manifesto that read in part, quote, the decimation of the environment is creating a massive burden for future generations. If we can get rid of enough people, then our way of life can be more sustainable. All right. Most climate displacement tends to be within a country or at least a region. People will rarely abandon their homeland unless they see no other option. But in every hemisphere, there is also cross-border movement. Bangladeshis leave flooded coastal communities to become guest workers in the Middle East. El Salvadorans, whose farms have stopped producing food, make their way through Mexico to find jobs in the United States. And people from the Sahel region of Africa flee the encroaching desert, traveling north to pursue a better life in Europe. We want to bring you along for the journey. That last route is the one that we will be following over the next 3 weeks. Our itinerary will take us to 3 countries, following a path that countless migrants have taken before us, from Senegal through Morocco to Spain. So here's a little map. They started in Senegal, and then, which is actually Saharan Africa. That's right where the Sahara blasts all the way to the coast, right across Africa, to Morocco, which is northern Africa, which is also desert, and then to Spain. So our stories from the trip will be broadcast on the radio and published on NPR.org during this year's UN Climate Summit, which is taking place in Egypt in November. So that's coming up soon, Sandy. We also want to take you with us as we experience the journey, giving you opportunities to follow our travels in real time. So we have launched a live travel blog that offers daily behind-the-scene update from the whole team. The last time I flew to Senegal was aboard Air Force One. I was a White House correspondent covering Barack Obama's trip to Africa in 2013. I accompanied the president as he visited Gorée Island, a port where boatloads of people captured and condemned to slavery were shipped to the West. It was the last place many touched African soil. After gazing out the door of no return, Obama reflected on what he took away from that view, telling reporters, "We have to remain vigilant when it comes to the defense of people's human rights, because I'm a firm believer that humanity is fundamentally good, but it's only good when good people stand up for what's right." This project focused on a different kind of mass exodus, though it too raises questions about human rights and the goodness of humanity. When I spoke with Tal about her research into climate change and her own family's experience in Senegal, she used an expression I had never heard before. As she described the extreme weather events forcing people to relocate, she said, "No one will sit on a sinking ship." The phrase struck me, and I asked her if this was a well-known Senegalese expression. She seemed surprised by my question. "It's a concept that is simply obvious where she grew up," she said. "It's common sense where I come from." So that's the end of that. So it seems that on NPR, there's going to be a couple of chapters that they're going to air about their journeys through Senegal, Morocco, and Spain.
Should be fascinating for those of you that have the inclination to want to follow along.
Absolutely.
Why not? Well, we are moving along. Now, we are moving along a little more politically, and I am sure that this article will get the flush of the day somewhere in it. And I'm going to start it right now. I mean, I could probably flush right now at senior Republican politicians, and I think I will. Let's flush them away. We're going to flush them away. Goodbye, senior
Republican politicians. Goodbye. Farewell.
All right. There we go. See? Right away.
If it were only so easy, I'd like to flush Mitch McConnell down that toilet.
I'd like to flush a lot of them. All right. This is, here we go. Hurricane Ian's wrath made clear that Florida faces some of the most severe consequences of climate change anywhere in the country of the United States. But the state's top elected leaders opposed the most significant climate legislation to pass Congress, laws to help fortify states against and recover from climate disasters and confront their underlying cause, the burning of fossil fuels. Senators Marco Rubio and Rick Scott voted against last year's bipartisan infrastructure law, which devotes some $50 billion to help states better prepare for events like Ian, because they said it was wasteful. Anything that helps people, it's wasteful. And in August, they joined every fellow Republican in the Senate to oppose a new climate law that invests $369 billion in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the largest such effort in the country's history. And at the same time, Republican governor, he could get a flush all of his own, Ron DeSantis has blocked the state's pension fund, which I will say something after this about that. Remind me, Jen. All right.
Okay.
From taking climate change into account when making investment decisions, saying that politics should be absent from financial calculations. It's not politics. In the aftermath of Ian, those leaders want federal help to rebuild their state, but they don't want to discuss the underlying problem that is making hurricanes more powerful and destructive. I can't stand looking at them. All right.
They're horrible.
They are, especially the one.
I have to say something. So DeSantis and Rubio look like they have big 2x4s jammed right up their assholes. I'm telling you, look at that picture.
Look at Lurch was a better person than Scott. Lurch, I love Lurch, but look at this guy. And he's a criminal too. Rick Scott is a big fucking criminal.
Totally.
All right, so Yep, Medicaid fraud. Yeah, he's a creep. Anyway, as Hurricane Ian approached Florida's coast, the storm grew in intensity because it passed over ocean water that was 2 to 3 degrees warmer than normal for this time of year, NASA data showed. Its destructive power was made worse by rising seas. The water off the southwest coast of Florida has risen more than 7 inches since 1965. Yeah, but people will say, "Oh, that's all," but really, actually, it
That's
is.
huge.
It is.
That's
It's
huge.
huge, right?
That
I
is
mean,
huge. It means in 50 years, we've risen 7 inches off the coast of Florida specifically. And that number is only going to exponentiate. So, I mean, it is exponentiating. Sea level rise is exponentiating.
It
So it
is.
means like in the next 25 years, we might rise another 7 inches. So that's 14. All of a sudden, you're talking about real sea level rise. That's really harmful, especially
Yep,
when you put storm surge on it.
I think we're going to have Antonio back on because he is our sea level rise guru for sure. And I know he was worried last week because he lives in Winston-Salem and he was worried about it.
Sure.
All right, so where was I? Okay, so here we are. Finally, warmer air resulting from climate change increased the amount of rain that Ian dropped on Florida by at least 10%, or about 2 extra inches in some places, according to a study released last week. Mr. Rubio has secured millions of dollars to restore the Everglades as a way to store floodwaters and repair coral reefs to buffer storm surges. One of his House colleagues, Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, a South Florida Republican, has won billions for climate resiliency, but none of the top Republicans in the state have supported legislation to curb the greenhouse gas emissions causing climate change. With its sun and offshore wind, Florida could be a leader in renewable energy, said Representative Kathy Castor, a Democrat who represents Tampa. Instead, it imports natural gas that it burns to produce energy. And I'm not going to read these things. To admit that climate change is real and we need to address it bodes nothing but a harm for the future for Florida and the nation, said Charlie Crist, a former Republican Florida governor who won a House, as a seat as a Democrat and is now challenging Mr. DeSantis's reelection. Hurricane Ian is far from the first time Florida has felt the impacts of climate change. In Miami, the rising oceans mean streets and sidewalks regularly flood during high tide, even on sunny days. Even on sunny days. In the Florida Keys, officials are looking at raising road beds that will otherwise become impassable. Yet the state's leaders have long resisted what scientists say is needed to stave off a catastrophic future. Oh, you mean everybody move back to New York? Oh, okay, sorry. An aggressive pivot away from gas, oil, and coal and towards solar, wind, and other renewable energy sources. Attempting to reverse engineer the U.S. economy to absolve our past climate sins, either through a carbon tax or some Green New Deal scheme, will fail, Mr. Rubio wrote in 2019. None of those advocates can point to how even the most aggressive and draconian plan would improve the lives of Floridians. Mr. Scott, the former governor of Florida, I just can't stand the guy.
I can't either.
I just can't. Who is now the state's junior senator, has argued the cost of attacking climate change it's just too great. Don't
deal with it. Go underwater.
That's too great. Oh, he just wants to think it away. We clearly want to and need to address the impacts of climate change, he told NPR last summer. He did. But we've got to do it in a fiscally responsible manner. We cannot put jobs at risk. There's not going to be any. Hurricane Ian could be among the costliest storms to hit Florida, with losses estimated in the tens of billions. The two senators also voted against last year's infrastructure bill, which provided about $50 billion towards climate resilience, the country's largest single investment in measures designed to better protect people against the effects of climate change. That bill, which passed the Senate with support from 19 Republicans, oh boy, included measures designed to help protect against hurricanes. It provided billions for seawalls, storm pumps, elevating homes, flood control, and other projects. Many of those measures were co-written by another coastal Republican, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who called it a major victory for Louisiana and our nation. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, also a Republican, supported the bill too. Both states face enormous threats from climate change. But Mr. Rubio called it wasteful, while Mr. Scott said it was reckless spending. Both voted no. Mr. Scott and Mr. DeSantis did not respond, of course not, for requests for comment. Dan Holler, a deputy chief of staff to Mr. Rubio, said the senator opposed the infrastructure bill because it included unnecessary measures, just as he opposed the final version of relief for Hurricane Sandy in 2013 because of what he called extraneous pork barrel spending. But the larger issue, Mr. Holler said, is that those pushing broad measures to wean the nation from fossil fuels have yet to prove to Mr. Rubio that such efforts would actually slow sea level rise, calm storms, or mitigate flooding. Other Republicans offer similar explanations. Anna Paulina Luna, probably a lunatic, a Republican candidate expected to win the House district around Tampa Bay, spoke of devastation she said she saw in Fort Myers, Pine Island, and Sanibel. The damage is so catastrophic we're going to need help, she said on Monday. But Miss Luna pushed back hard on the need to address climate change by cutting fossil fuel emissions. She called it completely bonkers that the United States would harm its own economy while we send manufacturing to a country that is one of the top polluters of the world, referring to China. Mr. Chris sounded almost sympathetic as he discussed the bind that Florida Republicans find themselves in, accepting donations from the oil and gas industry, unwilling to raise the issue of climate change with their most loyal voters, while surveying the damage it is doing to their state. The oil and gas industry is not a major source of campaign cash for politicians in Florida, where offshore drilling is prohibited. Thank you. At least, right, Jennifer? I mean, it is.
For now, yes, it is. Thank goodness.
So Mr. Rubio received $223,239 from oil and gas industry since 2017, which puts the industry at 15th on his donor list, federal records show. Mr. Scott has received $236,483 from oil and gas, his 14th most generous industry. But the National Republican Senatorial Committee, which Mr. Scott leads, has received, and he also ripped everything off from, received $3.2 million in oil and gas donations this campaign cycle, according to the Center for Responsive Politics, eclipsed only by real estate, Wall Street, and retirees. By contrast, the fossil fuel business isn't among the top 20 industries that have given this cycle to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. There's an ideological versus reality divide here that must be very excruciating to those Republican politicians, Mr. Chris said. Republicans in the state have taken steps to fund climate resilience and adaptation efforts, but they shy away from using the term climate. In 2017, Mr. Diaz-Balart, the Republican chairman of the House Appropriations Subcommittee that funds housing programs, secured $12 billion for mitigation measures in block grants to states and communities, $1.4 billion for Florida. The word climate did not appear in the definition of mitigation. Well, if you're from Florida, look at that. Well, if you're from Florida, you should be leading on climate and environmental policy. And Republicans are still reticent to do that because they're worried about primary politics, said Carlos Curbelo, a former Republican congressman from South Florida. But on this, the consequences are so serious, it's worth putting politics aside and addressing climate head on. Well, Mr. DeSantis announced a program last year to provide $1 billion over 4 years to local governments to address flooding, rising seas, and other challenges. He has blocked his state's pension plan from accounting for the environmental performance of companies in making investment decisions. We are prioritizing the financial security of the people of Florida over whimsical, I gotta play it again, whimsical, here we go, of notions of a utopian tomorrow, he said in a statement. Mr. DeSantis' record on other climate decisions may also come back to haunt him. As a congressman in 2013, he voted against a bill to provide extra disaster aid to victims of Hurricane Sandy, the same type of extra support that Florida is now seeking for Ian. On Friday, Mr. Rubio and Mr. Scott wrote to their Senate colleagues asking them to support a package of disaster aid. Like Mr. DeSantis, Mr. Rubio opposed a similar measure after Sandy struck the Northeast in 2012. Mr. Scott had not been elected to the Senate yet. How he was ever elected, Jennifer, I don't know. Yoka Arditi Roca, executive director of the Clio Institute, a nonprofit in Florida that promotes climate change education, advocacy, and resilience, said the state's top elected officials need to do much more than react after disaster strikes. Florida will continue to be on the front lines of more destructive hurricanes fueled by a warming climate. Ms. Arditi Roca said, we need Republican leaders to step up. Well, I think she's going to be waiting a long time. Poppy, I think, said something about liking that picture. It's kind of, one of those pictures that really it does say something. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this article, Jen, before we go on about, okay, New York Times and all. It is not just, well, first of all, the state and what the state pension invests in.
Right.
It's taking investments and not investing in the fossil fuel industry. It's investing in different industries. And yes, on this channel, we talk about solar, we talk about wind. We know that nothing is going to be the real panacea, or the answer. We know that. We understand there are problems with everything because once you figure out, you finish drilling and doing all that for fossil fuels, there's still going to be mining and ripping the earth apart for rare earth. I mean, we have problems with everything. But while we are here, and while there are other ways of doing things, Florida's pension fund really should be investing in different companies besides, they call it clean energy, but at least, wouldn't it be nice? Like, I know that my organization, when I was at work, the Research Foundation, we had a social choice fund. And when I had any money, that was what I invested in because we could make the choice ourselves. Now, I know with state pension funds, it's usually you can't, but sometimes you can. It all depends. I don't know what Florida says. So that bugs me.
And just the very short-sightedness of this to block the pension fund from taking climate change into account when making investment decisions, and then making the excuse, well, politics should be absent from financial calculations. It's so divorced from reality. It's just completely, it's like capitalism on steroids to even think things like that. It's insane. It's bonkers, really.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that are crazy. And I understand there is pork barrel spending in every bill. Change the system, guys. If everybody is so worried about it, they don't change the system. There's a bill written and 40,000 other things get put into that bill. Change the fucking system, guys. But do they do that? No, they'd rather complain and they'd rather say, well, we don't like it because that's, there's other things in it, but nobody's going to talk about changing the system.
Absolutely.
That's the bottom line, is changing the system, which is what Bernie Sanders had advocated for. And he opened up everybody's eyes to the shitty system, so that's all I really wanted to say.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much more we could do, but we're going to move on. And thank you guys for listening to my little bit of a rant,
It
All
was
right.
good thoughts. Good thoughts. So the next one up, guys, is from The Guardian. Hurricane Ian, Americans urged to weigh risks of rebuilding in vulnerable areas. Well, that seems like a good thing to think about.
And then we have an
You're gonna build
intermission
a
after
house.
this. Yep. Well, we have an
God.
intermission after this one, too. I just want to remind you. Yep.
So the FEMA administrator says people should make informed decisions about rebuilding in areas hit by natural disasters. That's good. The U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, administrator Deanne Criswell asked Americans on Sunday to make informed decisions about rebuilding in vulnerable areas hit by natural disasters intensified by the climate crisis. Quote, people need to understand what their potential risk may be, whether it's along the coast, inland, along riverbeds, or in Tornado Alley, Criswell told CNN's Face the Nation. People need to make informed decisions about what their risk is if they choose to rebuild there, and they do so in a way that's going to reduce their threat. Criswell's comments came 4 days after Hurricane Ian devastated barrier islands and coastal communities around Fort Myers Beach, Florida, with estimates for rebuilding running into the tens of billions. Oh dear. The state's Medical Examiners Commission has confirmed that the storm resulted in at least 44 deaths, most of them due to that's right. Most of them due to drowning. I think it's over 100 now, right, Cindy?
I do think so. Yes.
Other estimates say the toll was already at 72. So just in a couple of days, it's gone up. Yeah. And it's expected to rise. So I think it's over 100, right?
Yeah.
Of those dead, half were found in Lee County, which includes Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, and Cape Coral. Meanwhile, the U.S. Coastal Guard said Sunday it had suspended the search for 16 people who went missing off the coast in Boca Chica, Florida on the 28th of September because of Ian. About 70% of the county is without power. Across the state, about 837,000 businesses and homes remained without power on Sunday. The Associated Press reported that water was still rising in central Florida, with officials warning that flooding could continue for several days, particularly in areas around St. John's River and its tributaries, which were left swollen by the powerful storm. The latest natural disaster to hit the U.S. comes after a series of floods, tornadoes, fires, and hurricanes has laid bare the rising costs of devastation associated with a warming climate. It has been widely reported that only about 18% of Fort Myers residents had purchased flood insurance. If you live near water or where it rains, it certainly can flood, and we have seen that in multiple storms this year, said Criswell. If you live near water, anywhere near water, you should certainly purchase flood insurance. Insurers say that they are anticipating between $28 billion and $47 billion in claims from what could amount the costliest Florida storm since Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Criswell's comments came as officials and political figures have deflected accusations that evacuation orders for residents of Fort Myers came too late for many to leave. The FEMA administrator defended that decision on ABC's This Week. The storm itself was fairly unpredictable in the days leading up to landfall, Criswell said. Just 72 hours before landfall, Fort Myers and Lee County area were not even in the cone of the hurricane. Criswell continued, as the cone of uncertainty continued to move south, the local officials immediately, as soon as they knew they were in the threat zone, made decisions to evacuate people and get people to safety. State senators and former Governor Charlie Crist told CNN that the timing of the warnings were something we'd have to look at. When you do issue an evacuation notice, assuming everybody is going to do it, you have to think, how fast can you get them out? The Lee County Sheriff, Carmine Marcino, said on Sunday he wouldn't change anything about how the evacuation plan was carried out. Quote, everyone wants to focus on a plan that might have been done differently, Marcino said. Well, I'm going to tell you, I stand 100% with my county commissioners, my county manager. We did what we had to do at the exact time. I wouldn't have changed anything. Defensive much? Joe Biden and the First Lady Jill Biden are set to visit the devastation in Florida on Wednesday, 2 days after the president is supposed to take a trip to Puerto Rico, where thousands of people are still without power, 2 weeks from Hurricane Fiona's hitting the island. This is not just a crisis in Florida or South Carolina or Puerto Rico, the president tweeted on Sunday. It's a United States crisis. Well, that's still kind of short-sighted. It's a world crisis.
Yeah,
we'll
but
do
Puerto Rico isn't even a state yet, Jennifer. That would be nice. If it's a United States crisis, let's make Puerto Rico a state. I think that's a good idea. If they want to be.
Well, that's a big discussion item.
Yeah.
And they've been voting on it for the past 60 years in Puerto Rico, and they haven't passed it. So they clearly don't want to join us. I think not. We'll do everything we can get to get these communities back on their feet. In Florida, satellite images from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, shows how storm surge demolished structures on the shore of Sanibel Island. In addition, the roadway linking the island to the mainland has been severed in several places and could be structurally unsound in others. That road is pretty well trashed. We took a look at that last week, or whenever we did, Friday. Marco Rubio, the Florida senator, told ABC that it was likely that Fort Myers will recover, but would not be the same. They're going to be rebuilt. That he must be talking about Fort Myers Beach, which is on that sand spit. It was pretty much wiped out. And I doubt it's going to recover. It's definitely not going to be the same. They are going to rebuild, and they're just going to do it. They're going to be rebuilt, but it won't look the same because you can't rebuild old Florida, Rubio said. Some of those places that had been there for so long are just gone. The Republican senator predicted that it would take at least a couple of years for the causeway to Sanibel Island to be rebuilt. I think our priority now is to identify people that remain on Sanibel Island who want to stay there, but eventually have to come off because there's no way for them to continue their life there, Rubio said. There's no way to restore the power. There's no economy get there. At some point, they'll have to be moved. Additionally, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis directed state transportation officials to restore bridge and road access to Pine Island in Lee County by the 8th of October. FEMA's Criswell warned that this is going to be a long road to recovery. The administrator signaled that any lessons to be learned from the disaster would come after the federal and state agency had discharged their initial responsibilities. We're still actively in the search and rescue phase, trying to make sure that we are accounting for everybody that was in the storm's path and that we go through every home to make sure we don't leave anybody behind, Criswell said. So, you know, I would say that that particular Guardian article was kind of like, I mean, it was laced with hopium because there's so many things that were not said. And I couldn't even stand doing DeSantis's and Rubio's words. You know, it's like I felt like I might get possessed by them to say their words. All right.
I hear you. Well, we have an intermission, actually.
Oh, we do. Good.
Yes, we do. Let's get ready, guys. We have a little intermission that I have prepared. It's not a big deal. It's nothing. I didn't really make it myself, but let's check it out and let's get it ready. Okay. Pretty sure it is right here.
Climate change is happening, and our cities need to adapt quickly.
The battle for climate change will be won or lost in cities.
Cities play an outsized role in climate change, consuming around 75% of the world's energy and producing more than 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. But they can also be part of the solution, creating meaningful impact while being small and nimble enough to avoid the bureaucracy of global politics. In fact, many have already started work. 2022 marked some of the most extreme weather events on record, with wildfires and droughts ravaging parts of Europe, the US, and Africa, while Asia battled disastrous flooding and monsoon rains. And experts warn it's just the beginning.
What we calculated and what we knew as a 1 in 10 years event is now becoming 1 in 5 years. So the frequency is increasing.
Our cities are at the forefront of those shifts. Today, more than half of the world's population live in urban areas, a figure that's set to rise to 68% by 2050. This migration pattern is driven partly by the climate crisis, which, in turn, creates new risks and stress for urban infrastructures.
Many of our world cities are built on river systems or on water, for example. And as global temperatures rise, we have a lot of sea level rise, a lot of issues related to flooding, and so cities really feel the impacts there.
By the middle of this century, 1.6 billion people living in more than 970 cities look set to face chronic extreme heat as a result of climate change, with average summer temperatures surpassing 95 degrees Fahrenheit. At the same time, 800 million urban residents could be affected by sea level rise, and 650 million by water shortages. That has major implications, not only for the environment, but also politics, the economy, and society at large. Urban infrastructure and systems are typically closely interconnected, meaning a failure in any part of the network may be contagious, multiplying the damage.
If London was to flood, then the cost would be immense. London Underground, DLR stations, hospitals, schools, the list goes on.
So what can our cities do to respond to and reduce the rising risks of climate change? Terry Wills, former director for global initiatives at C40 Cities, a global network of cities aiming to tackle climate change, and now urban strategy leader at design firm Arup, explained more.
There's quite a few cities that have really interesting approaches and initiatives. We always hold up the example of Rotterdam, for example. The Netherlands have reclaimed land from the sea. What Rotterdam is doing is welcoming the water and basically building infrastructure that will take in the water and use the water when it's there, but have different uses for the spaces when the water isn't there. They might have public spaces that when the waters come, you can enjoy the water, you can use boats, but when the water isn't there, it's more of a public realm space for sitting and eating and that kind of thing.
Here in London, the Thames Barrier, one of the largest movable flood barriers in the world, was launched in 1982 to protect the UK capital and its citizens from high tides and storm surges.
The tides that go in and out of London each day aren't a threat to the city. They're contained within the flood defence walls on either side of the river. But if we get a surge element, that allows a hump of water to be formed that can add 1 metre, 2.5 metres on top of the tide, and it's that element that would overtop the defences.
Consisting of 10 steel gates spanning the width of the River Thames, when closed, the barrier can stand as high as a 5-storey building, providing protection to 125 square kilometres, nearly 50 square miles of central London.
The Thames Barrier effectively puts a wall of steel right across the river. We bring the smaller gates into the defence position and then the larger gates before we slow the river down, and then we finally bring the gates up into the full defence position and hydraulically stop the flow of the river.
Hydrological and meteorological data is fed into the barrier's control room every minute from a broad network of tide and river pressure and water gauges. Any decision to close is based on a combination of 3 factors: the height of the tide, the height of the tidal surge, and the river flow entering the tidal Thames.
We've had 206 flood defence closures since 1983. Our busiest flood season was when we had 50 closures in a 3-month period.
Elsewhere, in the equatorial city-state of Singapore, water scarcity concerns over the past several decades have compelled the government to shore up water reserves and reduce their dependence on imports from neighbouring Malaysia.
They designed the water system that maximizes all the possible resources they can get to. So they still import, but much less. They collect all the rainwater into the storages and reuse that water. They collect and treat all the wastewater and recycle quite a large part of that and reuse it. And they also use saline water, so they have the salination plant.
Singapore has also created a fund to combat rising sea levels, with an estimated $100 billion needed in its war chest over the next century to protect the island. Drought and inland flooding are 2 of 5 major hazards presented by climate change, alongside extreme heat, wildfires, and coastal flooding and storm surges. In a 2021 report on how cities can adapt to climate change, consultancy firm McKinsey, alongside C40 cities, outlined 15 high-potential actions that cities can take to reduce such risks. Those include 4 actions all cities can implement to build resilience, such as raising public awareness and boosting financing. The other 11 actions aim to reduce the impacts of specific threats and improve a city's ability to recover from them. Cities at risk from extreme heat, for instance, can apply cool surface treatments like white paint to roofs, walls, and sidewalks to help reflect sunlight and reduce urban heat. Others facing wildfire risks can focus on prevention, such as planting fire-resistant vegetation and creating breaks to slow or control fires. Meanwhile, those vulnerable to coastal flooding and storm surges can invest in flood and storm-resistant buildings and coastal barriers. In seeking solutions, it's also important to ensure the cure isn't worse than the cause, and that any adaptations don't create more climate risks. That's where nature-based solutions, or so-called blue-green design, can come in.
Blue-green design fundamentally says that we should build with the environment, having new developments which ideally would have the systems that recycle the water, maximize the use of the rainwater, so that's the blue bit, and then the green bit is the systems that have, say, green roofs, lots of green space around the buildings.
Planting trees and installing green roofs and walls, for instance, can reduce temperatures, capture water, and provide sustainable urban drainage solutions.
This is not to say that nature-based solutions can solve everything, but there is much more, I think, opportunities to really combine green infrastructure with green spaces and then have that blue element where we think about maximizing the use of the local resources and recycling it as much as possible.
Still, the threat of climate change is ever evolving. So what more might cities and their citizens start doing now to evaluate and respond to those risks?
They can look at, okay, well, we've put in this much blue and green infrastructure, we've installed, this stormwater management system, but how do you know that those are actually having a result? As a community, have some of the temperatures lowered in a particular area compared to previous years when the temperatures were at a similar level? So understanding the results of those interventions is going to be really important, and Arup wants to provide our cities with kind of the measurement frameworks that they'll need to be able to assess that, which then helps with planning.
Such measures aren't just environmental, they make political and economic sense too. According to the World Bank, investing in more resilient infrastructure globally could save as much as $4.2 trillion in climate change damages.
The cost of installing some of this infrastructure and preparing for the worst might be seen as excessive, but then the damages often felt by extreme flooding, by the heat stress that we're seeing, can often be greater than the cost of the intervention.
The UK's Environment Agency is now exploring how the Thames Barrier might need to be expanded to safeguard the 1.4 million people and £320 billion of property and critical infrastructure it protects.
The Environment Agency has got an adaptive strategy, and that plan, based on data, will react to what's actually happening to sea level rise rather than predictions. And that will offer a range of solutions, but a likely solution for the protection of London is Thames Barrier 2, probably built around 2070, probably downstream of where we are now.
Sustainable Future, brought to you by Petronas.
Sorry. That's that. All right. So there was our intermission. I told you, we told you it was kind of mainstream media night. And that was what, CNBC, I think. And that's their business section. And of course, it's financial. It's business as usual, really, but just trying to clean up things for business as usual to go on. Pretty much.
Indeed. Indeed.
Right.
So we are ready to cover the climate wire, right, Sandy? Ian will financially ruin homeowners and insurers. So people have been wondering, what are these people in Florida going to do? Will they be able to get insurance? So this is a look at that, right?
Yeah.
Hurricane Ian is expected to financially ruin countless people in Florida whose homes were not covered by flood insurance when the storm inundated the region with powerful storm surges and damaging downpours. The personal financial losses are a reflection of Ian's intensity and the fact that millions of Americans nationwide haven't bought flood insurance. The federal government's National Flood Insurance Program, the dominant source of flood coverage in the U.S., protects only a tiny fraction of homeowners, almost all of them in coastal areas. Ian's web of damage was unusually widespread as the hurricane drove storm surge into coastal areas and triggered river overflows and flash flooding across inland Florida, where almost nobody has flood insurance. President Joe Biden declared 9 counties disaster areas Thursday, making residents eligible for flood aid to pay for minor home repairs, such as long-term housing and other emergency costs. But 1.8 million households in 9 counties, only 29% have flood insurance, according to an analysis of government records by Politico E&E News. That leaves 1.3 million households at ground zero without federal flood coverage. In Hardee County, only 100 households have federal flood insurance out of 8,000 households in the county. That's a 1.3% coverage rate. Hardee has one of the lowest income levels of any Florida county, and only 44% of its residents are Hispanic. Oh, and 44% of its residents are Hispanic. Ian could financially ruin thousands of families in Florida. There's no better way to say it, said Mark Freelander of the Insurance Information Institute. Flood insurance is not included in homeowners' policies. That forces people to buy flood insurance separately, though almost no one who lives inland from coastal area does. The vast majority of flood coverage in the U.S. is sold through the Federal Emergency Management Agency's National Flood Insurance Program. It's it's a big mouthful. It's unclear of how many people have flood policies through private insurers. People without flood insurance could be devastated. Oh yeah, no kidding, right? Especially when you come back and your house is not there anymore because it's been washed off its foundations. Problems. At the same time, the damage caused by Ian's 155 mile per hour winds could plunge Florida's private insurance market into deep chaos, potentially forcing additional insurers into insolvency and triggering a surcharge on almost every insurance policy in the state. The Insurance Information Institute, an industry-funded research group, estimates that Ian has caused at least $30 billion in damage. That would make it the 12th costliest U.S. disaster since 1980, according to NOAA records. Ian hit Florida as the state faces an insurance crisis. Policy holders there paid the nation's highest property insurance rate, and huge losses have forced 6 small Florida-based insurers into insolvency this year, while others have stopped writing new policies. That has pushed homeowners into Citizen Property Insurance Corporation, the state-backed insurer of the last resort. The number of its policyholders has doubled over the past 2 years and recently passed 1 million for the first time since 2014. Insurer losses are due to a combination of extensive legal claims and huge payouts on policies in states such as Louisiana, which has faced 2 catastrophic storms since 2020. Florida is already having a problem with insurance availability. It's having a problem with affordability, and it's having a problem with reliability when insurance companies are going insolvent, said Nancy Watkins, a principal Millman actuarial consultant. All 3 of these pillars of sustainable market are under threat. Yeah, well, that's true. Freelander says he expects Ian-related claims to drive several local insurance companies into bankruptcy, making it even harder and costlier for Florida homeowners to buy property coverage, period. Many insurers have been on the financial edge for several years. This may push them off that cliff, Freelander said. The average property insurance rate in Florida is $4,231, nearly triple the U.S. average of $1,544, according to the Insurance Institute. A major issue as Florida begins to recover is the extent to which the damage was caused by wind or by water. The question has huge implications for property owners without federal flood insurance coverage and for private insurers that could face billions of dollars in wind damage claims. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis danced. I wonder how he danced around a question about whether Citizens Insurance has enough money to pay Ian-related wind claims. Instead, he emphasized the storms damaging floods, which are usually covered by the federal government. Quote, "We are looking at a lot of flood claims," DeSantis said, adding that citizens should be able to pay Ian claims without charging a special assessment on its policyholders or in all insurance policies in the state except for medical and malpractice coverage. Watkins said that disputes and litigation will arise when property owners like Citizens Property insurers, like Citizens, deny claims because they say damage was caused by flooding, which they don't cover.
And you know what I have to say to that? Yeah.
Exactly. In a litigious environment like Florida, that could be a perfect storm on top of the perfect storm. Oh, wow. Perfect storm squared, right? Records from the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation show that insurance companies denied roughly 30% of the million claims filed after Hurricane Irma swept the state in 2017. The denial rate in Florida for Hurricane Matthew in 2016 was 40%. Citizens has $13.6 billion in reserves and has projected paying 225,000 claims from Ian, worth a total of $3.8 billion.
Wow.
So, higher temps, more inland floods. The good news for Florida, is there good news? Is that it has more federal flood insurance policies than any other state. Well, buddy, you're going to need it. Your state is going underwater.
I mean, they keep building more and more heavy buildings.
I guess that's good news, but let's keep it in perspective. At about 20% of households, that's only second to Louisiana. Nationwide, only about 4% of the properties are covered through FEMA's flood insurance program. But the bad news is that flood coverage varies widely across Florida and among counties that have faced the worst damage from Ian. Oh my God. I'm almost done. Okay. I'm sorry.
We're fine.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. In 9 counties that Biden declared a disaster, coverage rates for Florida damage range from 1.3% in Hardee County to 3.2% in DeSoto County to 67% in Collier County, which is in the state's southwest corner and is one of Florida's richest counties. There is going to be a lot of folks without flood coverage, said Carolyn Kowski, a leading expert on flood insurance and associate vice president for economies and policy at the Environmental Defense Fund. If you don't have flood insurance, economic recovery from these events is really hard. Not as hard as when your state goes underwater. Some parts of Florida suffered huge flooding and are not among the 9 counties that Biden declared a disaster. Orlando, which is Florida's 3rd largest city, experienced up to 15 inches of rain and saw flash floods, according to the National Weather Service. The city has 130,000 households. Yet, records show that only 2,039 buildings are covered by federal flood insurance. So by 130,000 households, only 2,000 of those are covered by federal flood insurance. That's a coverage rate of 1.5%. Inland flooding caused by Ian highlights the fact that as climate is changing storm patterns, we're seeing a lot of flooding away from the coast from stalled hurricanes and intense precipitation, Kowski said. Lots of areas are at risk of flooding. People without flood insurance will have to rely on FEMA aid, which is capped at $72,000, but usually results in payments of less than $10,000. So sorry, out of luck. When flash flooding devastated eastern Kentucky in July and August, only about 2% of the households in the flooded area had flood insurance.
And those people, they're so poor down there.
FEMA has given $73 million in disaster to 7,800 Kentucky residents, an average at about $9,350 each. So if you're looking for FEMA to bail you out and you've got a lot of you've got a lot of flooding and you have no flood insurance, not much is going to happen for you, I'm afraid.
Oh, and it's a shame. I mean, I actually looked into flood insurance here when the side of my house flooded from the creek going
Oh,
over,
right.
and but there is no flood insurance. You have to get it through FEMA. I can't get it
Oh.
through my insurance company. They told me anything for flooding has to go through FEMA, literally.
boy.
So the insurers will not even do it with me here, and I'm not even near a big body of water other than a creek, that I was just
Oh, boy.
asking because of remember 2021 and all those problems I had with my basement. So
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing. And the people, especially think about all the people that live in that live year round in the trailers, $10,000, you're done. The only people, Jennifer, that are going to be able to live on any of these coastlines are going to be wealthy, wealthy, wealthy people who don't need insurance to rebuild. Those, millionaires and even billionaires that have the money to just say, oh, well, we'll just rebuild and don't need insurance. And that's it. Because the people that have been sold a bill of goods about living in those barrier islands or whatever are getting the truth now. They're getting the idea that it is just not going to happen for them. So, all right. I see you guys are all really busy in the chat. We have one more article, and we are actually ending on a little bit of. I had started with the video from this place. It's not a super long article, but we're going to end on a little bit of hopium, dare I say, or a little. You know what, guys? Fill in the blank, whatever you want to call it, but here it goes. This 100% solar community endured Hurricane Ian with no loss of power and minimal damage. Now, we saw that in the beginning. Those of you that have been with us from the beginning, I played a snippet of a video about the developer that came up with this whole idea because, it's about money. And that's quite some array of solar panels there. Holy crap. Anthony Grande, or Grand, whatever, moved away from Fort Myers 3 years ago in large part because of the hurricane risk. He's lived in Southwest Florida for nearly 19 years, had experienced hurricanes Charlie in 2004 and Irma in 2017, and he saw what stronger storms could do to the coast. So Grande told CNN he wanted to find a new home where developers prioritize climate resiliency in a state that is increasingly vulnerable to record-breaking storm surge, catastrophic wind, and historic rainfall. And what he found was Babcock Ranch, only 12 miles northeast of Fort Myers, it almost seemingly light years away. Babcock Ranch calls itself America's first solar-powered town. Its nearby solar array, made up of 700,000 individual panels, generates more electricity than the 2,000-home neighborhood uses. I thought they said in the beginning video it was going to have like 50,000 homes, or did it say that, Jen? I thought.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
that you're around
And
50,000
that
new
video
homes.
was 4 or 5 years old, so I don't know.
Okay.
All right, 2,000 home neighborhood uses in a state where most electricity is generated by burning natural gas, a planet-warming fossil fuel. The streets in this meticulously planned neighborhood were designed to flood, so the houses don't. Now, I think that's cool, actually. Native
that is.
landscaping along the roads helps control stormwater. Power and internet lines are buried to avoid wind damage. This is all in addition to being built to Florida's robust building codes. Some residents, like Grande, installed more solar power panels on their roofs and added battery systems as an extra layer of protection from power outages. Many drive electric vehicles, taking full advantage of solar energy in the Sunshine State. Climate resiliency was built into the fabric of the town with stronger storms in mind. So when Hurricane Ian came barreling towards southwest Florida this week, it was a true test for the community. The storm obliterated the nearby Fort Myers and Naples area with record-breaking surge and winds over 100 miles per hour. It knocked out power to more than 2.6 million customers in the state, including 90% of Charlotte County. But the lights stayed on in Babcock Ranch. It certainly exceeded our expectations of a major hurricane, Grandi told CNN. And I guess that's a damaged building in Babcock, which is not really much compared to what we've seen. And there was a tree, big deal. Okay. The storm uprooted trees and tore shingles from roofs, but other than that, Grandi said there is no major damage. Its residents say Babcock Ranch is proof that an eco-conscious and solar-powered town can withstand the wrath of a near Category 5 storm. We have proof of the case now, because the hurricane came right over us. Nancy Chorpening, 68 years old, who lives in Babcock Ranch, she told CNN, we have water, electricity, internet, and we may be the only people in Southwest Florida who are that fortunate. Grandi said Hurricane Ian came through Southwest Florida like a freight train, but he wasn't afraid that he would lose everything in a storm, like he was when he lived in Fort Myers. We are very, very blessed and fortunate to not be experiencing what they're experiencing now in Sanibel Island and Fort Myers Beach, Grandi said. In the times that we're living in right now with climate change, the beach is just not the place to live or have a business. Well, there's I think the first sound sentence we've read in most of this.
Yeah,
So
no kidding, right?
really, yeah. This is where it is, right here in that little circle there. Okay. Far enough away. Solar success. Yeah. Sid Kitson, a former professional football player for the Green Bay Packers and Dallas Cowboys, is the mastermind behind Babcock Ranch. Kitson envisioned it to be an eco-conscious and innovative neighborhood that is safe and resilient from storms like Ian. The ranch broke ground in 2015 with the construction of the solar array, which was built and is run by Florida Power and Light. And its first residents moved into the town in 2018. So since then, the array has doubled in size and thousands of people have made Babcock their home. It is, sorry guys, little piece of hair. It's a great study to show that it can be done right if you build in the right place and do it the right way, said Lisa Hall, a spokesperson for Kitson, who also lives there. Throughout all this, there's just so many people saying, it worked, that this was the vision. This is the reason why we moved here, Hall told CNN. So perhaps the highest endorsement for the city is that it is now a refuge for some of Ian's hardest hit victims. The state opened Babcock Neighborhood School as an official shelter, even though it didn't have the mandated generator. The solar array kept the lights on. Some of Chorpening's friends who live on Sanibel, where I've been, by the way, and it was a snippet of an island, which is now cut off from the mainland after Ian's devastating storm surge, severed the causeway, came to a shelter at a friend's house at Babcock Ranch. It'll be a while before they can go back, she said. They're going to be renting a place over here for a while they figure out what's going to happen out there, she said. I joke that we may be the only people in Southwest Florida whose property value just increased. I wonder what it costs to rent a place there. It's who knows. Even Kitson chose to ride out the storm in Babcock to see how the community would fare in the hurricane. Kitson declined CNN's request for an interview. Hall said he's focused on helping neighboring communities rebuild. He was there during the storm, he said. Where else would I be, Hall said. We built it to be resilient, and as much as you plan and think you've done the right thing, you don't know until you put it to the test. That's it, huh? Okay, that's some of the neighborhoods there. But still, as building, they built on, what was farmland, I guess. As utilities scramble to restore power across the state, Babcock residents say September storms showed that America's energy infrastructure is not well equipped to handle the worsening storms and those extreme weather events. Hurricane Fiona ravaged Puerto Rico's power grid when it made landfall there on September 18th. Now Ian has left millions of people in the dark in Florida, or had. Babcock residents say their neighborhood is a model for urban development in a climate change ravaged future. All right, I like the words.
Yeah.
Ravaged. Nobody says those words on
Yeah,
CNN.
no.
It's
Right.
not what it was 25 or 20 years ago. The storms are getting bigger and bigger, and it's no surprise because the warnings have all been there, Grandi said. I think Babcock Ranch's future has gotten even brighter. So we end on, I don't know if you want to call it a good note, a hopium note, a happy note, whatever. It's happened. It's there, And if I had the choice, quite frankly, to have solar panels on my house, I would. You do, Jen.
I
So
do.
I would, and Jen does. So it's just the only thing about this is that wouldn't it be nice to just have it on the roofs and not have to have these big farms? I'm not the biggest fan of the farms, but so let's see, what are you guys saying, and let's see how long we've been. We have been an hour. We've been this long show.
Long time, yeah.
Yeah, this a long. It went fast though. It went really
Did.
fast. It's
Did.
great
We
to see
stayed
you,
on
Heidi. Yeah, great to see you guys. Jen, would you like to? I don't think we have enough time for any kind of questions.
No.
And things, so why don't we just? I'll give it to you, Jen, and take it away.
Well, it's been a fascinating show. Infrastructure is, part of our civilization, and the fact that Amtrak's not now running between Los Angeles and San Diego, and also the fact that there's a nuclear power plant, although I think it's not in operation at the moment, in San Onofre is kind of shocking.
Right.
And then, we covered so much about the hurricane infrastructure problems, and, also we got into psychology, like how GOP leaders opposed climate change, and now they want it. It's kind of like, so
well, they want the money.
It's so predictable. But in any case, it is what it is, guys. Hold on to your hats. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Here we are, right?
Here we are. We're in a bumpy ride. And all of us know, all of us know. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming to our wonderful show. And we hope, as usual, that you enjoyed our choices and what we wanted to bring to you tonight. We'll be back next Tuesday, and I will let you know what's going to happen with any other day. As always, here there's a lot to do outside, but so I don't know about Friday yet, but I will let you know. And what else? As always, thank you, everybody, for all of your generosity. Thank you so much. We are grateful. And with that, we're out of here. We are